Welcome to Perspectives. Today we are going to have a conversation with Stacy Gallagher. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Stacy is part of our counseling center here at Orchard Hill and is one of the therapists that's available here. And we wanted to talk today about what do you do when your spouse is distant and aloof, and you've had the first little conversation about it, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And so we're going to jump into that in just a moment. But before we do that, I just want to remind you there's a lot of great content available on Orchard Hill Plus. There's the 5 Good Minutes podcast, this Perspectives feed, the book review. There's classes there that have happened at Orchard Hill over the last couple of years, as well as all of the weekend content in the normal feed. So Stacy, tell us first, just as a therapist, how common are marriage challenges?
Marriage counseling is actually my favorite to do because they're the same challenges but different with every single couple.
Okay.
So simple challenges, like I think aloofness is kind of simple, to very complicated challenges like infidelity and things like that. But it's pretty much although they're coming to marriage counseling, so maybe not in every marriage there's challenges, but when they come to counseling, I do see pretty commonalities. Mm-hmm.
Well, one of my questions is, so aloofness seems like a simple thing, but a lot of times it's probably a symptom of something deeper, and now it could be pretty minor.
Yeah.
So how do you know when it's, just spend more time together, to, this person's masking deep resentment, or they are having an affair, or there's something else going on here? How do you go about even assessing that? How would you speak to somebody who would come to you and say, my spouse won't even come in?
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to deal with this alone, and it's been a persistent issue, and I can't break through. What would you begin to?
So that actually has happened and does happen a lot. I usually start with like the spouse who comes in to see if it's like, is there something that you're not changing? Because usually when one person changes, the other person responds. So if the person that comes in starts to change something, let's talk about some things that maybe how you can communicate or maybe try to understand that from a different perspective, reframing. I'm big about, okay, well, maybe that's not what it seems. Maybe it's that, they're just really tired and this is what they need from you first, and then they can engage. Try to change those things. When those things don't change, I sometimes will invite them to invite their spouse in as a way of helping them learn. So for example, if you were coming in and your spouse wasn't, I would say, why don't you invite your spouse in so that I can get some feedback from them on how to best help you.
Okay, so let's just say the spouse says, no, I'm good. Hey, what's the problem? What's the problem? There is no problem. Stop talking to me about all the problems.
Yeah.
There are no problems. I'm fine. You seem aloof. I'm not aloof. You've got the issue.
Yeah.
Okay, what would you try to help a person start to think through with that?
That's a really tough spot to be.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe reframing the question. I kind of talk to them about okay, so talk about what's happening right now. You're not aloof. Okay, well, this is how I'm defining aloof. You don't want to spend time with me. You don't want to talk to me. What is that about? A good question starter is always, help me to understand, fill in the blank. You can start any question with that, with anybody. Help me to understand why, when I say I want to have this conversation, you don't have the time for it. Or help me to understand why you don't want to come to counseling with me. Help me to understand why you think it's my problem. What am I doing? I like the golden retriever approach, where it's let me see what I'm doing. What can I do? You might get a lot of information that way.
Okay. So try to frame it in a way that is non-threatening, not you're doing something wrong.
Right.
But help me understand what's happening here.
Right.
Okay. Is it acceptable for a season for a couple to have aloofness, disconnected time just because life has them in that season? Or is it something to be concerned about quickly, or how quickly? How would you think about that?
I wouldn't be concerned if the couple was on the same page and saying hey, look, we realize we're both kind of don't have time for each other right now. And we recognize that this is where we are. We don't like it, but life has served us this situation the way it is.
Okay.
A bigger concern is if one like you said, one-sided. One person is saying, well, okay, this has been going on for a little while. I've tried to address it. I've tried everything that you mentioned in therapy. I tried making these changes. I tried talking about, approaching it differently from a more humble perspective. Like, what am I doing? What can I do to change? How can I do this? And if it's still not fixing, being fixed, then that's when I would become more concerned.
Okay. Okay, so what are some of the signs that there's probably something deeper happening than just this is a season, my spouse is tired, they're a little annoyed with me, and I've been a little annoying lately, so I get it. What are the signs that you would say, okay, this really is something bigger that you need to think through?
One of the big things is comparative relating. So if your spouse is acting differently with you, but with everybody else they're acting a certain way, that's a sure sign that there's something with that relationship. But if your spouse is kind of like disengaged from everything, then I'm concerned about your spouse's mental health, their mental well-being. They could be suffering from depression, and completely incapable of giving you what you need because they just can't. They're not functioning. They may be able to go to work and may be able to maintain that, but any kind of other functioning outside of that might be difficult. So,
okay, so when there's a comparative disconnect, so they're more aloof, distancing with you, but perfectly warm when, their sister comes over, type of a thing.
Yeah.
What would you then extrapolate from that?
As far as what does that mean, or how would I would when the sister is over, that was actually on, I forget what the show was, but I remember that quote from the show, and another friend of mine has said it too, when the spouse says, these people get the best version of you, why do I get the worst? And I think like calling a spade, you can confront it lovingly, but saying like, okay, did you see how this happened? This is what I'm talking about. I think too, like stories work really well. I like stories like, okay, because they may not be able to understand in this moment with this relationship, but say, okay, can you understand it, how it applies here? Well, that's kind of what it feels like now, something that applies in their life. If it's whether they're at work or with their family, or do you remember when this happened to you and this bothered you because your sister was acting this way, or your mom, or the people at work were acting that way? Like, I'm seeing those same things, and so do you understand why this is bothersome to me because you've been in that situation before?
Okay. So I guess one of my questions would be, what I'm hearing you say is, that's good counseling.
Yeah,
what I'm hearing you say.
That is very good.
Is find a way to challenge it, confront it, gently asking to understand, not coming at it hard. But if the other person just doesn't seem to genuinely want to connect, confronting it may have a negative impact.
Yep.
And may actually cause more challenge. So what should somebody do when they feel like, okay, I've tried to have these conversations over and over, and it doesn't seem like it's getting anywhere. I desire greater connectivity, but my spouse doesn't seem to desire that right now. What should that person then do where they say, okay, I've confronted this as many times as I know how to. I've tried the story. I've tried all of this. Now what?
I wish I had the magic answer to that.
Yeah.
That's a really tough position. Like, oftentimes I just deal with people at that moment, like, okay, well, I've asked the question, if this is as good as it's going to get, can you still love your spouse? Can you live with life like this? Can you redefine what your expectations are if this is as good as it's going to get? Like, one of my favorite things that, like, I always pray before I start a session, and I ask the Holy Spirit to, like, fill me with wisdom because He's the ultimate source. And there's time, like, one that He just gave me recently was like, you just preached about forgiveness recently. Can you forgive the person for who they are? That's forgiveness. Like, we can forgive them for what they've done over and over and over again, but real freedom in a relationship comes from forgiving a person for who they are. That, of course, doesn't align necessarily with who this person is around other people, but like, this is who this person is in this marriage.
Yeah. And
can I forgive them for that? Can I still find joy and happiness in this relationship if they are not giving me what I expected to be getting from a spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What are some of the indicators in your mind that maybe the person's aloofness is an indicator of another relationship?
Well, if there's other suspicious activity, you know, I personally, I think spouses should never have a problem with your spouse seeing your phone, checking your phone. If you have suspicions, and ask, can I check your phone? It's suspicious. Like if you have nothing to hide, then there won't be a problem. If they're spending a lot of time outside of the home, unexplained, unaccounted for time, you know, generally, I don't think I've ever had a situation where they're like, I suspect this. They usually come to counseling once it's already been revealed.
Right.
And that's kind of how they found out. It's the other thing. God is great about truth. Truth bubbles up eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
It comes out. And I honestly, I think that's how I would support a spouse if they suspicion it. I'd be like, let's pray together and be in prayer about the truth coming to light.
Yeah, I do agree with you that if somebody's secretive with their technology or whereabouts, that's concerning.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have anything to hide, even though it's a little annoying and off-putting,
Right.
it's okay.
Right.
Here, look.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and obviously you want to be careful with that. What if somebody says to you, this is so bad that I think I can't stay in this relationship. And yet when you probe, other than the person being distant from this person's standpoint, and let's say you even had the other person come in and they didn't seem that distant to you, but to them it was, well, you're not, you don't sit and watch TV for 4 hours a night with me, and you don't hold my hand when we go for walks, and we don't go for walks as much as I want to. And this person's like, we went for a walk last night.
Yeah.
I held your hand yesterday.
Yep.
And on and on. Where's the, I guess, how do you help somebody assess when this is a breakdown in a relationship that is complete to this is just mismatched expectations, and then how would you counsel somebody who starts talking divorce with this and probably no affair?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I have found that if the spouse is still invested in the marriage but maybe aloof, 10 times out of 10 they're willing to come in at some point into counseling. If the spouse has already disengaged from the marriage, they're not going to want to come to counseling. And I think that's a good gauge. Like I have never seen one spouse come in and say, I feel like my partner, my husband, my wife is aloof. We've worked through these things. Can you bring them in? Never have they come in and already been disengaged from the marriage. Generally, if they don't agree to come into counseling, that's the first indicator that they've already kind of
checked out. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. What about dealing with hurt? For the person who feels somewhat rejected through this, how would you help somebody work through the hurt so that they could continue to function in the relationship without saying, you're aloof, I'll be aloof.
Yeah.
You check out, I check out.
There's definitely something special about a marriage relationship, but there's a lot of needs that you can get outside of your marriage relationship with friends, people to hang out with. Like sometimes people just are so lonely and needing that personal connection that they put all of that onto their spouse, and learning that I don't have to put all of that on my spouse. I can connect, I can feel connected and loved and valued and worthy with my college friends, I feel that at work, I get satisfaction with this, kind of takes some of the pressure off of all of that having to be from their spouse too. So if their spouse is unwilling to give them anything and they want to stay in the marriage, I would say, how else can you, what are you longing for? I don't mean step outside the marriage for things that should not be outside the marriage, but,
Good clarification.
Yeah.
Okay, I would guess that, especially if somebody's listening this deep into this, that there are some people right now listening who would say, whatever the disconnect is, I have tried to connect with my spouse, in some cases for years. I don't feel any biblical reason to leave, or we have kids, financial incentive, or I just, out of trying to honor them, I just don't feel like they've been so dishonorable that I should leave.
Right.
But I can't break through and connect. What are their options?
Staying in the marriage and being dissatisfied.
Assuming that they're there. I mean, I would say one is just becoming resigned and saying, I'm not going to try anymore because this isn't working. So I'm going to figure out other ways to feel fulfilled in life, and I'm going to stay for the kids or whatever it is.
Right.
I would say trying to keep confronting it, even though you have and it hasn't gotten anywhere. Probably the third would be trying to say, what can I do to pursue and get into their terms?
Yeah.
Which is really hard if you feel like you've been hurt and rejected after numerous attempts to do that. But I would think trying to say, okay, how do I enter his world? How do I enter her world? How do I show that I want to be in their world? Right. Because that really is what this is about, is you end up in two worlds, and sometimes it's very unintentional.
Right.
Sometimes it's, as you said, there's a season, and the couple says, maybe willingly, okay, we're entering this season, and one person stays in the season because they feel the need to, for whatever reason. I mean, it might be an issue with one of your kids, where it's like you're in together, and then one person says, well, I'm staying here, and the other one says, I can't live there forever.
Right.
I want to go back over here where we used to live.
Right.
And now the person won't come with you or whatever. I mean, you see couples do this who even just have kids.
Right.
The marriage is strong, and then all of a sudden they have kids, and one's so about the kids that the other person says, I need some of you apart from the kids. And they're like, no, this is our life now.
Right.
So I guess what I'm asking is, when somebody's in a scenario where they don't feel like leaving is biblical or right or advised, but they don't feel like they're getting any headway, what strategies, what things can they do to navigate that in their life?
I always start with prayer.
Okay.
And I don't remember exactly what scripture it is, but there's one tiny one, especially, and I'm thinking from a female's perspective, where it talks about the wife persuading her husband and winning them for Christ. Continuing to love and pour and invest into that person where they are without the expectation. That's where the hurt comes in. You've got reality, and you've got the expectation, and the space in between is where all the hurt and disappointment is. And if you can align yourself, okay, like this is as much as I'm going to get from my spouse, but what am I expecting of myself to be the good wife or to be the godly husband? Like, what am I doing? Then you can sit at the end of the day and be like, you know what, I honored you, God. Like, I stayed in this marriage. I have no reason to leave this marriage. There's really a lot of joy in knowing at the end of the day that maybe they didn't give anything back to you, but you were functioning as a godly spouse in the way that you treated the other person. That is a different kind of satisfaction.
Yeah. There's a few things. I love starting with prayer, because I think a lot of times we don't even think of that as a resource of saying, God, would you? I remember years ago I had a friend who was going through a hard time in his marriage. And I kept calling him and saying, hey, how's it going? How can I, help you? And hey, why don't you go for counseling? And his thing was, you know what? I started getting up every morning and spending the first 20 minutes of my day praying for my marriage and my wife. And God did something.
Right.
And so sometimes we ignore the obvious opportunity. I would also think, and jump in and correct me if I'm off on this way of thinking, I do think there's something to saying I'm doing this for Christ, not for them, that can be a spiritual act of service. But having said that, I think there's two opposites in this, and I love what you said about expectations and reality, and that's where the hurt is. One is you have to try to lower your expectations and say, I can offer this without expecting. While simultaneously drawing a boundary that doesn't put yourself repeatedly in the same place for hurt.
Right.
And those sound like opposite things, but it seems to me that that is a way that then you can honor Christ, honor them by saying, okay, if every time I ask them to go for a walk, they scoff. I don't like
Stop
walking.
asking them to go for a walk.
At some point, you have to say, okay, they're not going to go for a walk.
Right.
I'm going to stop asking.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to keep putting myself in that same place of feeling rejected, hurt. At the same time, I have to say, okay, I do want to pursue them even if they don't pursue me. How can I offer that and have a low enough expectation that I can offer it legitimately in order to say, I am still pursuing something. Another thing that I would think is helpful, and I know if my wife were sitting here, I know you work with my wife, she would tell me I'm crazy on this. So it's your chance to tell me.
We're kind of soul sisters, so let's see how this goes.
Which way I am. Sometimes our perception of reality and reality is skewed. And of course that's true. We all perceive. And sometimes I think that scorekeeping can be helpful. And this is where my wife would say, no, scorekeeping is always bad. And what I mean by this is not I'm going to keep score and tell you the score, but sometimes somebody's perception is I ask you to go for a walk and you never go for a walk with me. Well, maybe you should write down how many times you actually ask them to go for a walk and how many times they actually say yes or no.
Right.
Because sometimes your perception is, oh, that never happens. And I always ask, and you may have asked 3 times and they may have said yes twice. And in your mind, the one time they said no was the big time. And that's the reality of the last month.
Yeah.
Now, maybe 2 years ago you did it. And one of the things that I think is true is that emotional hurt time transcends emotional hurt. And what I mean by that is you have a hurt, and then when something triggers that hurt again, you feel it as deeply as when you felt it before. So rejection, if I was told no about a walk, that's a goofy example, but repeatedly 5 years ago when we were in a season.
Right.
And then all of a sudden somebody says no about a walk today, I may feel all of the hurt of 5 years ago projected into this moment. And that's where I'm saying sometimes I think scorekeeping actually can help, because all of a sudden I say, oh, the reality is she said no one time, he said no one time this month, and I only asked 3 times. That's actually not too bad. That's pretty reasonable, but I'm feeling all of this. And so sometimes there's some real self-assessment that I think can be helpful. So weigh in, my wife's side or my side? Which side are you on?
This is a tough position. Now, I started to be on her side with the scorekeeping, because you don't want to keep score, because it goes to the true value of compromise. Compromise is not a score of sacrifice. So it's not, I gave up 3 times, so now you need to give up 3 times.
I agree.
But compromise is actually, all right, you don't like to go for a walk. Let's find something that you like to do, because all I really want to do is spend time with you. I can walk by myself. Right. So compromise is a better goal when you're trying to talk about connection. Like, okay, let's keep trying. There's a million things. We always think that we only have a few options. There's a million more options than you ever think you have. And aligning expectations with reality. Okay, well, let's find something that we realistically both would enjoy doing. And again, but it goes to, like, if the person has already checked out, if they're involved in another relationship, there's nothing you're going to do about that, because the ultimate thing is that they don't want you. But most of the time, I find couples, when there's this distance and the separation, they both want the same thing.
Yeah.
They just don't know how to get there.
Yeah. And let me be clear about something. When I say scorekeeping, I'm referring to it for yourself. If you ever whip out your scorecard and say,
exactly.
I said this and you did, you say I never help with dishes. Ha!
Yeah.
I did it this many times. That's never a good thing, because now you're using it as a weapon.
Yeah.
I'm referring to it as using it for your own reality check to say, is my perception based in reality, or is it not? And for example, if the dishes were the issue, what I would encourage is not, well, actually, I helped you 17 times. I would encourage instead to say, well, why do you continue to bring that up? And again, go down a path, but now at least you have some idea
Right.
if that's reality or if that's really, and the other thing you'll, I think, find sometimes when you do that is that it allows you to actually make some choices proactively that are for the relationship, because if you do keep track, you start saying, well, maybe I should do the dishes more. Since that's important to them and they've brought it up a bunch,
Right.
maybe if I actually keep track of it, I'll have an idea that I actually am doing something that matters to them. So I'm jumping into this.
Or conversely, I've asked them to go for a walk. They always say no, but they never say no to watching a movie together. Like, oh, and I didn't. I'm on both sides. I'm on both sides of the coin on this one.
You've come around. You're coming around. You're
Well, I was going to rephrase it as not necessarily keeping score, but there's a saying, like in therapy, we always say the extremes. Always and never, just eliminate those, because that's never true.
There you go.
So eliminate those extremes, but aligning your reality. Fun story. There was years ago, whenever my kids were little, I have 4 kids, for those of you that don't, I have 4 kids in 6 years. So I was feeling overwhelmed. And I really have to believe it was the prompting of the Holy Spirit, because I kept putting it off. I'm like, no, because that's scorekeeping. I don't want to do that. And I didn't want to do it. And so I put it off. But then I finally gave in and just listed out all the things that I did that I was responsible for, and all of the things that my husband did and he was responsible for. And then I categorized them. And as it turned out, item for item, we were even. We all did the same amount of things, but all of my things were the daily, never-ending, you don't see a finished product things, and all of his things were seasonal, or you see a finished product, or you can feel like it's done. And that was revolutionary for me. To your point, the scorekeeping was for me, because I was like, well, I'm not doing all the work, but it also gave us conversation points for me to say, I feel like I'm doing more work because I'm doing things that are never ending.
And
Could
broad
you
understanding.
take one of these things from my responsibility list?
Let's trade.
That's exactly what we did.
Yeah.
And he does the dishes now.
Yeah.
To your point.
Yeah.
So it definitely can serve a purpose in gathering your own. And to be fair, you talk about this hurt that happened a while ago. It might not have even been your spouse.
That's right.
You know what I mean? That could have been something totally unrelated that you're still emotionally responding to your spouse out of something that they didn't even,
in fact,
a hurt they didn't even cause.
it isn't your spouse.
Right.
You are responding to a behavior that may have been your parent, a sibling, a coach, a boss, somewhere in the past, and you say, I don't like that.
Right.
Stop it. And you,
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But they have no idea, and it's not fair for them to be graded on a test they don't know they're taking.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, good. Any last thoughts on just what you would say to somebody who says, I'm trying to connect and I'm feeling like I'm running into a wall?
I really hope that everybody takes away, the one takeaway is that 9.5 times out of 10, your spouse is probably also feeling disconnected. You both probably want the same thing. It's a matter of changing your communication, you're changing your understanding of reality, continuing to pursue. Come into counseling if you need help. You don't have to be broken to come to counseling. Sometimes it just takes another person to say, that's why I love marriage counseling, because I get to hear both sides, just like I did with you and your wife, keeping score or not keeping score. It's like, I honestly can hear validity in both sides and helping each person see the other person's side. So I'm not trying to market the counseling center, but it is definitely good to have a third person.
I'll market the counseling center, and I don't get anything from it.
No.
But we have a great team here at Orchard Hill that will really be able to help you navigate some things if you'll give that a try. And like anything, you get out of it what you put into it. If you come in resistant, but if you come in open-hearted, willing to look at yourself, I'm confident that it can be a great tool in personal development healing and in a relationship as well. Thanks again for joining us today on Perspectives. A lot of great content here on orchardhillplus.com, or not orchardhillplus.com, but Orchard Hill Plus. I don't think it's its own website yet, but maybe someday we'll work on it. But thanks again. Have a great day. Thanks for spending a little bit of your time here with us.